Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, I'm going to tell you the story, the design story behind Joule, and I hope why that may be relevant is for you to see how and why the thing ended up the way it is, and also the processes were quite unorthodox for various reasons, so hopefully that will be of interest. I will start though with a bit of background. As was mentioned, I grew up here, and I started my career at UCT doing mechanical engineering. But I heard about something called industrial design, and I say it that way because it didn't exist in the country at the time. And I also heard that there was a part of that was called automotive design, and that really appealed to me. So I thought I should have a go. So I redesigned a Triumph Spitfire with plaster of Paris, and that got me into the Royal College of Art. I had a bit of luck. And from there, I went to Jaguar, and in 25 years designed 5 sports cars and a few other bits and pieces, which also led me to do some product design. And I'll just go through briefly some of those products. This is a sort of collage of some of them, and you'll see a mixture of medical and cars and other bits and pieces. But it started at Jaguar really with this car. It was fairly soon after joining, I had an opportunity to compete, as one normally does, with everyone else in the studio to do the new sports car. This was going to be a replacement of the XJS. And I was fortunate to have mine chosen, and this was its sort of final version, the coupe and convertible. For lots of reasons, it didn't go into production as a Jaguar, but was changed to become the DB7. While that was going on, the engineering director at Jaguar wanted to take on Porsche and Ferrari at Group B racing. So we said we'll build a purpose-built racing car, but Group B means it's road legal. So he got volunteers, both inside and outside the company, to do this because we had no budget and we had no resource. And this was the car that was revealed in just over 20 years ago now, in Birmingham as the concept, and that went into production. And this is the production car. They made about 280. It was a really silly car, but it was heroic and it was good fun. It was the fastest production car in the world. I think it was also the most expensive, but it was fairly significant for me. It put me on the map, but also got me into doing these. Now, there's not an obvious connection. You need to be a visionary to do that, but there was one who was running a company that made magnets for MRIs, and he said, would I like to design one and break the mold of coffins in front of washing machines, which is what most of them looked like at the time. And I don't do straight lines, so anyway, this was my first attempt, and that was launched in '94 in Chicago and did very well, and that led to other medical projects. This is a gamma camera for the same company. That's a nuclear medicine scanner, and this was the big brother of the other one you saw, and that led to later on to other things. This is a little leisure craft, but this is part of my double life at the time because I was also designing Jaguars. I did the concept for the XK8, and then later on a Hooligans version of the XK8 called XK180, which was a runner but a concept, and this is it. And that, there was so much interest in that, as with 220, that it was decided to put that into production, and I didn't have a brief, so I designed a car for me, and this was the F-Type, and this was it. And that was going to be competing with Boxsters and that ilk of car. For lots of reasons, politics and other things, it didn't happen, which gave me the opportunity then to take a package from Jaguar and go it alone, because I really didn't like this idea of working both in normal hours and after normal hours. And so since then I've been working on various automotive and product design projects until about 2.5 years ago, when two calls came from, or two connections with South Africa. First of all, speaking here, and that was a revelation, what it's doing, because as I say, when I left South Africa 33 years ago, industrial design didn't exist here, and now Indaba is the biggest design event annually in the world, and that is so impressive. At the same week, I happened to, through some coincidences, get connected with a bunch of guys in Cape Town who wanted to start an electric vehicle industry. Again, visionaries. And, you know, that's not a timid ambition. We needed to meet, so I came out here, and, you know, one has to sort of treat this sort of ambition with a little bit of skepticism. But actually, when meeting them, first of all, they'd put together a really compelling business case. Their track record was very impressive. They were heavyweights in project management because they'd done the SALT project, which is the South African Large Telescope, which is one of the world's great observatories. And they'd also done the Rooivalk, which is a helicopter gunship. Now that's unusual. But they know how to do complex stuff, so that was quite impressive. They also had some interesting backing here. Owen Ashley, who designed racing cars, Keith Bright, who modeled virtually all the South African cars. So there was other facilities here. And probably crucially, they had government backing. Now, that's serious, because then you think this could be viable, this could work. And something else, which was a real pleasant surprise for me, underpinning what they were trying to do was idealism. They really believed that this was going to be good for the world and good for South Africa. Now, when you worked in the car industry for 30-odd years, idealism is in very short supply. So we looked at some of the logistics, but the key thing really was to try and determine where we're going to go with this in design terms. So I needed to, because I know, particularly working with some other clients who are not normally used to working with designers, it's very important to get the design brief established right at the beginning, because in a sense they don't know what's possible, and one has to sort of try and find out if there's going to be common ground. Electric cars usually are either wacky or they're tree hugger. What Clarkson would call they cater for the Sandinistas. But you don't do that if you want to change the world, because if you want to make a difference, then lots of people need to buy it. So the appeal needs to be broader than that. And we would have to be competitive with the best of industry in all the functionality, aerodynamics, ergonomics, particularly build quality, and also the legislation compliance, which is a minefield. I also felt that we wanted to try and do something that was contemporary, that was distinctive or individual, rather than different, sporty, but above all, that this was going to be a serious car, and we wanted to make it look serious. I have a problem. I don't like geometry, so as you can see, my cars are sort of use a different design language, and I wanted to use that because that's the language I use, and that is using form, and particularly fluid forms. And this is what the engineering sort of package at the time looked like, just in a sort of generic thing. Not only did it look awkward and difficult, but actually the weight distribution of that would have made it dynamically a problem, in fact, poor. We looked at a lower one, and that got even worse. So we then started to look at alternatives, and I found that their idealism actually extended to dimensions, and I wasn't used to that. They were really keen on trying to keep this as compact as possible because of weight, which is a very admirable objective, But all of a sudden, I was really sorry that I'd kind of raised the bar and the ambition of this design thing, because as we went through the various proportional options, I found that I'd have very little space to work in, that the spatial envelope was so limited that I'm going to end up with a box. And I don't really like boxes. So this was really quite a worrying time for me. But we had settled on that proportion, and you could see sort of where that was coming from. This was a typical competitor. There were a sort of genre of cars that had that 3 cubic meter cargo volume and or 5 seats or maybe 6 seats. So in design sense, we weren't up against it, but there were cars out there that do these sort of things, and they look ordinary to say the least. Anyway, I got on with, it's the first time I was actually going to design a car entirely on computer, because with my product design I had used that. But normally the car industry uses clay, and that's my medium. I'm a frustrated sculptor perhaps. But here I'm trying to do it electronically, and you can see underpinning all of this is the engineering. But I started to sketch out in wireframe the body panels, and after a little while I got to this, which was at least a slightly disguised box. But the proportions I was really not happy with. It looked too tall. So I then started to rejiggle the 3 cubic meters around the space and the shapes that I had created, and was able, with again some vigorous debate, to get the height down by 80 millimeters, and was working with that proportion, and I thought we're in with a shout there. The beauty of working electronically is that one can do renderings. Just a bit of that slide's been chopped off, but there's not much beyond what is cut off on your left. The front of the car is incredibly short because there's no engine in there. And although it sort of looks normal, it really is very short. And this is, on computer you can do renderings that make it look semi-real. So I did some different colors and put Cape Town in the background. And it allowed us to make a sort of judgment on the design theme, and I'm glad to say people were very happy with it. And we thought that would be the basis of what we could do a car. But we also thought we'd like to make a van, so I just tried deleting the rear windows and the rear doors. At this point, the Department of Science and Technology in the government here had also pitched some money invested in the project. So we put their logo on the car and did a van. And I was amazed. It seemed to look okay. It seemed to look like it wasn't sort of cobbled up from a saloon car. It seemed to, so that we seemed to won that one. But now, this was an electronic model. We had to make a physical one. As I say, we had Keith Bright in the wings, who was very, very skilled craftsman, but we still had to get the electronic model into a physical model. And this is an unorthodox way because we didn't have CNC machining, full-size CNC machining here. So this is what is called an egg crate. It is a basically 3D sections, X, Y, and Z sections. And then those were later filled with foam, and out of that we created a car. But for me this was helpful because it allowed me to do a sort of sanity check on the thing. I'd only seen images and you'd only seen the perspective this big. Here this was the real thing and one could feel it and touch it. That's Keith and myself. And then they started to put glass fiber on the thing, and it was really weird because you could start to see more of the design, but you can still see all the sections through it. But from then on, the rest of his craftsmen got onto the job of surfacing it so that eventually it could go into a spray booth and end up as a car-looking finish. And that's what the car looked like when we first sort of had completed it just over a year ago. But we had a problem because I needed to look at it outside, but that was a security risk. So this was just in our sort of little view room. Had taken one set of photographs when I wasn't here of the car outside, but we did arrange to have a photography session in a sort of disused part of the foreshore. And that was really helpful because we could stand back and look at it, and the ends and the side, and it sort of looked like the renderings, and it sort of, you know, there weren't surprises that had come through. It looked like the computer model, and although we later made some comparisons, on the whole process had worked quite well. What was very important was to go and put it against the competition. Was the latest of the competition. That's a 6-seater Honda. So that has actually not as much capacity as our car in the front, but you can see it's a very much bigger car. But also we could see that the design language is very different. And we were quite pleased with that. But I was less pleased, and this is against some of the others, that's the Caddy van, which has the same cargo capacity, cargo volume as our car. It looks like it's much bigger, but in fact, capacity is the same. And then against a few other cars, including the other 6-seater, which we won't comment on. While this was happening, I had to design an interior, so that was back to the computer. This is, again, the packaging. That's the mannequins, and we designed for 95th percentile males and 5th percentile females, so that you cover 95th of the whole percent of the whole population. And I roughly sketched out some interior, but because it was going to be a 6-seater now, you couldn't have a center console. So that was quite difficult to try and get all the controls and into that. But this was the design theme, and this was the layout of all of the controls and instruments. And eventually a rehash of that was a refined version of that. And this time we went straight into CNC machining. And whereas the door panels were handmade initially and then CNC machined. And this, as you can see, the instrument panel or dashboard being built up, and that's as it was in the show car. What had also happened was that we had made some of the changes to the car because what was looming was our reveal first in Cape Town and then in Paris in October last year. So this was the show car, but with the rear end, I don't know, did I mention that I wasn't that happy with it? I quite liked its bum, but the bum was sagging. So I redesigned it a bit and it seemed to look better that way. And these are some pictures, and redesigned the headlamps to be a bit more contemporary and also more fitting of the surfaces. So this was the car that we, say, took to Paris, and got a very good name for it because that's a unit of energy. And there was the car on our Paris show stand. Just to conclude, I think what is important is to just mention the significance of this car in South Africa or wherever. South Africa does have a substantial car manufacturing industry, much bigger than people think. It's substantial and it's mature, but virtually all of it are foreign manufacturers doing what are called screwdriver operations. They just build the here. Their added value is made abroad, of most of the high added value, but in particular the intellectual added value happens elsewhere. The vision of optimal energy was to try and create that expertise here. And I was brought in as part of that. I have 2 designers here in Cape Town who are learning their trade from me here. So there is that is happening. And I think that this is something that, and of course with engineering, it's the same, this is all happening. So that hopefully there will be a commercial legacy to this project and to this business. But there's been a lot of talking about what Design Indaba is all about. It is that intellectual legacy. And this fits very nicely into that vision. I mean, this is only part of it. And also that the vision that the Mayor of Cape Town referred to yesterday, that hopefully, while this is a hugely ambitious project, the signs so far are really encouraging, and hopefully that legacy will be part of the significance of Joule. Thank you.